Okay, that's right. Hey, very fast. One, two, three. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
Testing 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Testing one, two.
What's the thing? Taking up the stairs? Or we can do it on the side.
Check, 1, 2.
Okay, well, maybe we should get everyone up here. To see it, right? Yeah. I think, we haven't got enough chair. Oh, I step. No, no, I'll stop. I'll finish. I'll finish one.
And there are six, there's six mics.
Okay.
So.
I think you need to come up and, take this. Yeah.
Anyone who is in the camp. Yeah. Here, otherwise we don't see you on the camera. The camera, you will get cut in the camera.
Okay.
So we can pull. Yeah.
We need to compress everything. Let me know.
Yeah, now we're good. Yeah.
So I can be seen here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Including plus you, I thought there were six.
Yeah, no, it's seven. So we need to go.
So you'll stand.
I'll stand. Yeah.
We can share the microphones.
I think it'd be good if we could just, I could sit it up, because I don't want to say, maybe if we take.
Can you pull down a little bit more?
Sure. That's fine. So I can down.
So
That's put. Sure.
Big stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Give us instructions so that.
Yeah.
Or-
Nice and low.
Okay, just move the tiny bit down. And then you can Okay. So. Okay. It's on. Okay. Can you hear? Okay. Okay. I know. Well, do some of it. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce our third session in the REEKOLECT series. And I'd like to start by welcoming Daniel from REEKOLECT, who has been sponsoring this series, and asking him to say a few words to kick things off. Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Sanchez. I'm the CEO of REEKOLECT, and yes, we're powering these series. Very excited to be in front of these panelists and their expertise and hear this great conversation that we're all going to take part in. Just tell you a little bit about our company. REEKOLECT is an AI software company that's specializing in creating avatars of deceased loved ones, which you'll be able to engage with, connect with, because we want to usher a new era where we can revolutionize the way we connect and remember. And honestly, being part here of these series and such a staple of the community here in Florida International University, honestly, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here and being able to sponsor this. But again, you know, REEKOLECT, we're on a mission. We're on a mission of not only being able to leverage AI for just efficiency, and much like though AI has been here since the late 40s, right? Just 2 years ago when we started discovering about ChatGPT, we started drawing creating, you know, funny pictures and so on. But now we can see in just a number of 2 years how much it's evolved. And now we're having applications for it that truly are resonating and connecting with human beings, especially with our mission to want to ensure that with one of our technologies, which is called CBT technology, which is conversations beyond time, that we can actually make it a possibility of preserving our deceased loved ones. As they move on and fade away within our memories, we can keep their essence with AI now. So that's the power that's being developed right now at REEKOLECT. And again, very exciting to be part of this industry, of this era. And again, very excited and honored to be next to these panelists and hear their conversation about it. But aside from that, again, thank all of you for joining, and thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you also to Digital Futures for live streaming this, so people all over the world who will be watching this. So, in the background, this is AI generated. This is the student, architecture student, or student of anything today, walking into an unknown future. Everything, I would say, in the future is shrouded in uncertainty, especially education. Whenever I talk about AI, someone always asks the question, well, what about education? This is like the $6 million question, or $6 billion with inflation these days. Everyone is asking this kind of question. And after a while, we had a session on digital futures, which involved Joseph Choma, who's here today, and Areti Mokopoulou. And then actually, the initial session we had was with Sanjay Sama from MIT Open Learning, where he says that already, even without AI, things need to change within architectural education, within any education. There is more information on YouTube than any one professor needs, can teach. So in other words, the professor has to change from being this imparter of knowledge to someone who's more a curiosity stimulator, pointing people in the right direction. Things are changing as a whole, but no more so than in the world of AI. And we had a special session on that with Joseph Choma about that, where we were taking that further forward. And as a result of that, we decided to put a book proposal together. But it took us several months because we weren't quite sure what to say because so much is uncertain. Nonetheless, we put a book proposal in last week to Bloomsbury, and let's see what happens. Yesterday, I was invited to a conference at the Politecnico di Milano, on AI in education? Everybody is asking this question right now. And I woke up this morning with an email from Bloomsbury, my publisher, saying, can you write something about AI in education more generally? It seems to be something that is a particularly hot topic. The problem being, in a sense, is that we are, as educators, teaching you guys who are students, preparing you for a world, and yet we don't know quite what that world will look like. I'm sure there'll be a version of architecture, but it might well look very different to the architecture of today. Things are changing rapidly on an almost daily basis. And the challenge for education, frankly, is that it is very slow to change. To make an appointment often takes close to 2 years to get someone in place. And you often get the danger, not that we have it here, of professors who are still talking about the same thing they were talking about 30 years ago. They don't change. There's a famous story that Joseph Rickbert told me about a professor who, when he first started, was packing out the audiences. And when he retired 30 years later, only had 6 people in the front row. And he said, I don't understand what's going on. I'm teaching exactly the same material as I used to. Maybe that's the problem, right? But even if you are up to date with things, how can you possibly keep up to speed with technology that is changing on a weekly, if not a daily basis? It is a complete crisis in many ways for education. But the problem is not so much how do you teach AI, as so much as how will AI change education itself? How will it change it when we will forced to operate in totally new ways? When AI can do everything, what do we need to teach? When AI can generate essays, can generate designs, how are we going to set assignments in the future? When people are already going to AI to go and ask to ChatGPT to ask about medical questions rather than going to a doctor, is that not going to be the same case with professors of architecture? Are we not going to face similar challenges? And do we even need to have 5 years for an architecture education when there's maybe so much is covered by AI? There are so many uncertainties. We are, like this student here, walking into a very uncertain future. The only certainty is, in fact, that there is going to be uncertainty. Anyway, to my mind, the most important thing when you're faced with this challenge is to start identifying what the key issues are. If you can be, it's better to be aware of a problem than to be trapped by one. Once you realize the problem is there, then you can start to address it. So we're very fortunate to have some very distinguished colleagues here. Actually, Southern Florida, surprisingly, is a hotbed of AI in architecture. Let me start with Joseph Choma, and I'll say very briefly, Joseph is the new director of Florida Atlantic University, where there's an undergraduate program that is in which AI is thoroughly integrated. Also teaching at FAU is Daniel Bolojan, who was here briefly as a visiting professor. Daniel is probably one of the leading AI architecture experts in the world. He's behind Deep Himmelblau for Core Himmelblau, and we're doing a book together on AI and the AI design revolution. Also at Florida Atlantic University, we have Smaro Katsangelou, who is doing a PhD, and she's the only person I know who's doing a PhD on AI, partly in a computer science department and partly in architecture, or rather the only architect I know who's doing that. Closer to home, I'm delighted to have my colleague John Stuart, who's been putting together this astonishing series with me. And John has been hosting a kind of a workshop with colleagues here discussing the challenges of teaching AI in the studio. Also from FIU, but also University of Miami, Lorena Knesevic. Lorena is both working in Gensler and also working on AI and the future of practice for her DDes. It's fascinating what she's doing. So she's also joining us here. And last but not least, certainly not least, we're very lucky to have Lars Lerup with us. Lars is a very distinguished academic. He was teaching at Berkeley before becoming the dean at Rice University in Texas for many, many years. And Lars goes back to the very beginning. He was part of the architecture machine group at MIT, the forerunner of MIT Media Lab. So we have his wisdom with us. So what I want to do is to start off by just bouncing a few questions off each one, of each of our panelists. And then we're going to open up to a panel discussion, and then we're going to invite questions from you, the audience. Trust me, this is going to be a fascinating session. So I want to just start off with asking Joseph Choma, who is the new director, to approach the teaching. Oh, sorry, the teaching of AI in an undergraduate program such as FAU.
Well, I think to start out, it's not enough to add AI and stir. Yeah, in other words, saying that the solution is just putting one course on AI into a curriculum is really not a solution at all. I think we really have to think about how we can fully integrate AI throughout the curriculum from first year all the way throughout to graduation. And now if you think about AI, it also depends on how you define it, about how you would approach integrating it. If you think about it as something purely technical, like this is a technical tool, then you might think, oh, okay, I'm going to integrate this technical tool and introduce it multiple times. But really, I think beyond that, we have to think about how it's going to change the practice of architecture. You know, my colleague next to me, Daniel Bolojan, he thinks the future of AI is not one super AI, but that there'll be thousands of AIs. And actually, one of the roles of the architect will be to create a network, to really create a workflow between these different engines and change the way we go about really tackling the most challenging problems of our time. So if that's the case, then really the future becomes a shift from focusing on how we design artifacts or focusing on end products to more so being about how do we start to focus on how we design processes, systems, or workflows. Once you change that shift, then the way in which we create a foundation for that for the future of AI moves beyond the technical skills of learning specific tools and more about how we train students to think through that manner. So for us, for instance, in the first year, students learn about computational thinking and making. They learn not just how to make drawings, but how to write rules behind those drawings. In their first theory course, they don't just look at historical precedents, but they start to demystify those historical precedents through computation. And again, if you imagine feeding an AI an architectural floor plan, it just sees an image and you can say, oh, that's a column, that's a door, that's a window. It can only do so much with that. But if you can understand the ordering logic as an explicit set of rules and feed that to an AI, now it becomes a really different way of training that model and creating a collaborative feedback loop. And then later in the curriculum, we have specific courses trained at developing these skills for the students. And eventually they get a course where Daniel Bolojan is coordinating in fourth year, where students are creating 3D data, self-organizing maps to interpolate that data, and learning how to even find different ways of qualifying it to change the scope of possible solutions from an interpolation to an extrapolation. That's pretty advanced. That's really like getting under the hood of these engines. And it goes beyond, it's something that's basically a skill that will evolve with these individuals even as the technologies keep evolving. And then the last thing I would say as far as integration is concerned, design studios were drafting tables. Then drafting tables went down and we put computers on top of them. And I really think with the advent of AI, we have to start rethinking what a design studio is, rethinking our space as what we work within. How can that space actually be a spatial instrument? So one of the first implementations we've done is we've transformed one of our design studios into a research lab, which is the Creative AI Lab, which Daniel Bolojan also coordinates and directs. That's a space that has a 180-degree screen. It has 3D scanners mounted to the ceiling. It has AR, VR equipment, and a giant server to compute things instantaneously. So literally a student can manipulate a physical model. It can get scanned in real time, go to a self-organizing map, which is like a big grid with AI to give you a new set of possibilities. A new set of possibilities can go to your goggles, tell you how to change that physical model all in real time. This is like human machine, physical, digital interface all in real time. I don't know what that's going to do for architecture, but I know it's going to change the way students approach architecture. And that's really what we're trying to do at FAU. And I think what many schools should try to do is just go in there trying new things and iterate and really think about it more systemically about fundamental ways of thinking and how we're going to think differently and approach problems differently rather than focusing just on specific tools.
Thanks. Maybe you could move on to Daniel, who was mentioned already. Daniel, of course, has been working on Deep Himmelblau, one of the most progressive AI-based architecture projects in the world. My question to Daniel is, how do we prepare students for the kind of progressive practice of tomorrow?
That's a tough question, just because it's hard to predict in a way how things move in the future. But for sure, we all start to sense in a way this kind of new kind of way of learning where we constantly have to learn every single year. Probably we have to learn something new, and rather than taking a degree and then using that degree for the next 20, 30 years, we are constantly asked now to keep updating in a way our knowledge somehow. So I think also when it comes to the profession, we deal with the same issue. So if we talk about, like, let's say a short-term, long-term kind of version, in AI, probably when we say short-term, probably you're talking about 1-2 years. Long-term, probably you're talking about like 5 years. So who knows, in 5 years, that's going to be short-term also. But if you think about like short-term, even currently, like there are more and more architecture offices that start to incorporate right now different AI technologies like generative AI or other types of AI models. And one of the reasons for that is the threshold, in a way, how easy it is to have access now to that technology, how easy it is to use it, the amount of resources you need, and the level of expertise. My feeling is that the trend is for that level of expertise to go further down, and also the amount of resources we need is going to go further down, meaning that we are going to be able to run like highly intelligent models on consumer grade, let's say, devices. And what that means that, as architects, we are going to suddenly have to engage with all these kind of generative AI tools. And a lot of these kind of generative AIs that we are dealing with right now, they are very fast, intuitive kind of models. If we are thinking about like a bit longer term, what this will lead to, this kind of progression of, the threshold of expertise and the threshold of compute that is required to run these kind of models, we are going to soon be able to run like multiple AI models real time on computer grade kind of devices. And that suddenly gets us into a sort of field of agentic AI, meaning we have AIs that have some agency behind them. And then the question will be like, how exactly as designers, how do we choreograph in a way the collaboration between this kind of AI agents, yeah? So right now, like at the moment, we are not yet there just because we don't have the compute, let's say, to be able to do that. But I think long term, we are going to get there. Now, when it comes to like how that translates into teaching and how do we prepare students, I think we have to start to develop this kind of critical kind of intuition, or to help students develop this kind of critical intuition where they start to understand perhaps how certain models can be used where in what kind of design task, and start to create this kind of generative kind of design workflows. So that will be a sort of short-term kind of idea, like how do we have to prepare students. But once we get to a long-term where we start to engage with agentic AI, for example, suddenly we are not just dealing with a tool, we are dealing with almost like a co-creator. We are going to deal with tools that have a level of agency attached to them. And the question is, are we going to become then just choreographer in a way of these processes, yeah? So we'll have to be able to develop this kind of intuition then of understanding the complexity of the design problem, and to be able to break that, in a way, complexity into a smaller kind of task. And the reason why I'm saying this is because all of us, we know design is not such an easy problem to deal with. You have like certain aspects in design that you can address in a very vague kind of manner. And at the same time, there are also aspects that they have to be addressed in a very specific, very precise kind of manner. So in design, we always have to deal with this kind of idea of, specialized knowledge versus more general kind of knowledge. And in design is never a sort of one system or two systems that have the same goal. You always have competing kind of goals. And what I mean here, I'm talking about, let's say, an aesthetical system in architecture has a kind of a different goal than a structural system. And as architects, what we are doing all the time, we are always trying to negotiate between these two. And then if you add on top of that a cultural system, a social aspect to it, it's always a sort of negotiation. And that's what leads to be, a design outcome, let's say, yeah? It's always a negotiation. So then if we think about agentic AI in architecture, it's the same kind of question then. How do we establish the negotiation between these agents? Yeah?
Maybe we can save Lars for the final comment, but I'll skip to Smaro just quickly, because Smaro is also part of FIU. Smaro, you've got the very privileged position of studying a PhD as an architect in a computer science department. I know we have some computer scientists in the audience today. What lessons have you learned from the world of computer science that you think that architects need to know?
Well, can you hear me?
Move forward.
Closer. Okay, maybe now. So I think the first lesson would be how do we experience the built environment as humans, and understanding that everything we experience can be seen as data, signals, or just information to be inputted into a deep neural network. That was something that opened up my eyes to the world of computer science, that can be in different scales or different media. It can be a multi-sensorial experience, even just soundscapes and sonary data. The other thing is understanding design as a problem-solving task, because what I learned from the computer science master student as I was taking classes with them was that they don't necessarily know what they're doing or what they're dealing with every time they jump into a new problem or into a new class or into a new kind of like interface. It's just that they know where to look for the answers and what type of questions to ask. So I believe that even in architecture, the answers that we get from our design can only be as good as the questions we ask. The last thing would be that it's a very modern idea to think that we can structure the urban environment in the way that we want, as like God creators or like makers of a definitive answer for our environment. But what AI opens our eyes up to is the fact that it's only a game of probabilities of whether something would work or would be kind of like beneficial for the environment and for our society. So understanding design as a task with multiple solutions or multiple different iterations in an iterative way rather than a linear project where there is a definitive solution.
Lorena, also doing a doctorate. You are also unusual in the sense that you're working for Gensler and also doing some research on the future of architectural practice, which is absolutely fascinating work. What lessons have you got about the future of architectural practice for architectural education?
Thank you, Neil. So what's so interesting is that whenever we think about education, thinking about what we ought to be educating our students, the first thing our minds go to is what is the future of our practice? But when we think of the future of our practice, it's about asking what kind of services would we even be offering at this time? I mean, when we think about AI, I literally already have clients coming in through the door that say, I did this on Midjourney, do that for me, please. So that is a really shocking thing to say, what is it that we are actually providing? And really, truly, what is it that we do that is of value? And even reinstating what is the value of our design process. So I couldn't agree more with everything you said, Joseph, about articulating all of our workflows and our processes even more. That is the key, I think, into having students that are trainable into the future. As we move forward, less and less will the kind of deliverable of a rendering or a kind of final over aestheticization of our outputs be that thing of value, because AI is able to assist us in doing that so well. Of course, design and beauty will always be there, but if we really think about the kind of profession and the nuances of the work we do, so much of it is a decision-making process. It's about being able to articulate our logic in a step-by-step format, and exactly how did we negotiate all of those different systems that we have to be layering and layering and layering upon each other to finally make the ultimate and best conclusion for our clients and for the outcome, which is that kind of final end product. So whatever we can be doing to insist that our students are moving in that direction, that they are able to articulate their own thought process, the better off we'll be. And I think one of the challenges is that even in a studio environment, so many studios in this case are still focusing on only that kind of final output, other than perhaps comprehensive studio where you're seeing all of these kind of systemic pieces in line, or maybe a part T diagram at the beginning. That's part of it. But I mean, I would much rather see that kind of workflow going through. And then in terms of practice, I mean, we see that we need to be, there's an interesting moment where so many of our students are, when they enter the profession, are almost at a loss for that apprenticeship component. I mean, they might be, because AI is now allowing them to, us collectively to skip some of those production steps where typically students would be able to, or early kind of new graduates would be able to enter the profession, learn with guidance, work on something, allow their subconscious mind to almost absorb some of that critical thinking skills that they need to have, and then keep learning as they go. If that keeps getting expedited, they almost need to jump forward so quickly into that ability to lead that process of documentation. So how do we do that, right? How do we get them to be able to be mentorable more quickly and be able to kind of take ownership in that process? So a lot of it is really that critical thinking skills, and almost that human quality of being able to communicate more so than ever before.
So, John, you've been working with a workshop with faculty members across and working out or trying to listen to what their fears and what their hopes are about the introduction of AI into the curriculum. What are the findings what are the things that you've come up with from that experience?
Well, thank you very much, Neil, and I really appreciate all the comments that I've heard so far. The comments have been very interesting, and they've kind of situated around two different areas, both of which we've heard a little bit about so far. One is about the need for the development of AI agents, and for students to be able to use AI as a tutor, to be able to use it as a critic, to be able to kind of understand it, integrate it into their way of learning. And Carlos Sarmiento, who's here, was really kind of rooting for this in his comments, and they really struck me because we're all kind of thinking about how AI can help us, but we need AI agents tailored to what we need in order for this to work effectively for us, both as students and learners and as professionals. And so the other component that really came out was one of our colleagues, Elliot Sturdivant, basically pointed me to the movie Conclave and said, we need doubt. We have so much belief that this is going to all work out the way we want it to. We need doubt. And essentially, he was saying within the process of using technology, we need critical thinking, which is what you were talking about, Lorena. We need to doubt what AI tells us, because we ultimately need to have a role in what our critical thinking processes are and how we use it. So it we were talking about ways in which we could possibly, have AI give students, and this reminded me of the way Neil and I work on these posters. So Neil will go back and, so I'll put a poster up, I'll do something on AI, and I'll say, hey, Neil, how about this? And Neil will be like, oh, that's terrible. It's, I can do better in 3 seconds on whatever app I'm using right at this moment. So Neil goes off and does it. But, and so he comes up and tests things, and then he sends me something, and he's like, oh, I hope you haven't put that in the poster yet. I have something just it's almost about to come out. I'm about, give me a minute. And then, but it's that process. There are years of experience in this process of selecting what it is that of the 1,000 options that AI can give you. How do you select the one that is if you're thinking ethically the best, critically the best, how do you select the option that has the most resonance? So Neil selected this because it had this image, because he was thinking about the AI future as being unknowable and undefinable. And this was the closest he could get to a space that was kind of, I'm quoting, I'm maybe misquoting you, but kind of, fertile with possibility while not being kind of too limiting in terms of what it depicts. Anyway, but it's that ability to kind of, as an architect, as a designer, but as any educated person in a world that's permeated by AI, it's that, I think, it's that challenge that we have to rethink how we do every assignment and how we help people, how do you make sure that students have the knowledge, that knowledge base to select, because we're all becoming editors and curators. And as such, we need to be very, very good editors and curators, because we're getting a lot of good options that we need to choose from.
So last but not least, I mean, the quick question for Lars. Lars has an incredible experience, as I mentioned, has been part of the the architecture machine group at MIT years ago, I think in the 60s, 70s. It was about before the MIT, led to MIT Media Lab. Lars, what from your extensive experience as being an educator in some of the leading institutions of the world, what advice do you have for us?
Yesterday, I walked along the new river in Fort Lauderdale. And a very nasty looking iguana noticed me, but I didn't notice it. It whipped me. I came too close right here with its tail. Apparently only at 35 feet an hour or a minute. Anyhow, it said to me, you better shape up. You're going to talk about the future. So that's why I'm going to talk about the past. In 1968, was it 69? Can't forget. I was a graduate student at Harvard. I hate microphones.
Sorry, but this is for posterity.
I slumbered about because Harvard was closed, it was the Vietnam War, and nobody wanted to go. So since I was a Swede, and Swedes were not for the Vietnam War, I went to my MIT, and it was learn about batch processing. I was going to redesign suburbia at that time. I'm still doing that, by the way. And I dropped that, and Nick Negroponte walked by and laughed at me, and we started talking. He was then running the machine operation. That was the beginning of my interest in something I didn't quite know what it was. It was obviously computers, and it was an event not dissimilar to what we are living now. It's just that the computer decentralized us all. AI need to bring us together. How do we do that? When I was a dean, which is a long time ago, it seems, I'm now retired, which is an idiotic idea. Where was I? The computers was sort of, they took us apart. And that was marvelous. I always had drivers because I never had much time to do it myself. I remained an observer, which is very useful. Anyhow, I stumbled on Marvin Minsky. Marvin Minsky wrote a fantastic book called Society of Mind. And I got a top speed course on AI just 5 minutes ago, sitting next to Daniel. When he was driving, he talked to me about what he's doing. And I came to the following. Why don't we have gin tonics? In my school, we always had gin tonics. So the mind is composed of agents. This idea that we are somehow centralized is long gone. We are split into several identities all the time. We have lots of agents that are out there plowing around. Buddhism has taught us that. We have to begin to understand that we are not alone. In a society that has bombarded you with individualism, that you are all by yourself, you have to do everything by yourself, it's really problematic. Because we have to get together. This form of education where some bottom earth like me tells you You are on your cell phones and I mean, you're barely paying attention like the two up there. And she's even yawning now. So, you know, what is it? Why don't we talk to each other? Why can't we have a seminar? So the seminar I'm thinking about, we're going to redesign the single family house. Why do we still live in single family houses? It's just a short period in everybody's life. And yet the only type of organization we live in is the single family house. Although we have all different constructions. So this today, we're going to redesign the single family house. We will not sit like this. We will be all around this table. None of you have chosen a major, but you have chosen an AI. One particular AI that you are a specialist on. But you also realize that you can't do anything with one little AI. You have to have a whole billion of them, as Daniel told me. So that's how we get together. We don't choose major, we choose AI. And we get together because redesigning the single family house is a cultural project. Architecture does not come from architecture. It comes from society, it comes from the city. We have then the chance to really revolutionize it, the way we live. So instead of this endless, boring crap that surrounds us in the 3 counties we operate in, the same stuff repeated, occasionally 6 skyscrapers next to each other as a kind of vertical suburbia. Ridiculous way of living, obviously. We always kept apart. There's always a distance. We never get together. It's the time to do that now. AI can help us. But we also have to realize that we are never perfect. We never have enough. We need each other because that's how we construct the world. That's how we construct the future. Ta-da!
Thanks, Lars. I want to just open up to some discussion from the panel. I just want to add a comment, though, that the word computare, computation, comes from the Latin computare, which means to think together. So let's have a little bit of discussion here, and I'm just going to invite anyone to say, just kick it off. Then I will have some questions from the audience.
So Lars, when you're talking about the kind of the past and how, you know, tools develop over time, but time is also a tool. And I also was thinking about the 1960s not from having lived it, because I didn't, but by looking at the architectural record article from January 1965, where they document a conference at the BAC, where computer scientists, experts in aerospace engineering, architects all came together to check how is the computer going to change the practice of architecture. And in particular, there's 2 futures that were presented at that conference that I think shed light into more than one future for AI, and also about how we think about it within the schools of architecture. One of them was developed by the MIT Lincoln Lab, which is called Sketchpad. Essentially, it was having you, what you do by hand, drawing by hand, and having you draw on a tablet. But fundamentally, whether I draw by hand or I draw on a tablet, I'm still thinking through the act of drawing. So I'm not fundamentally thinking differently through one tool or the other. One's just automating something. On the other hand, there was another technology that was presented by the Boeing company where they created 3-dimensional geometries by writing an algorithm. So these were rule-based geometries. This was a future that could never have been imagined before without the computer. And so for me, that became where the computer at that point was not just a tool to augment or a device to augment an individual's ability to perform a task. The tool actually became an instrument to think with. And again, it opened up a different way of approaching problem solving or the way we identify opportunities. And I think AI, there'll obviously be, it'll be a ubiquitous tool and a lot of things will automate for us. There's no question about that. But I think within schools of architecture, one of our roles is to unpack these other potentials, these other latent possibilities about how it will change the way we think about approaching practice. And I think that's what's really exciting about schools of architecture is that former one. And yeah.
I just wanted to chime in here as well, because not only is it AI as a tool or other technologies affecting the way that we do things, but it's also affecting the way everyone else does things, all of the other industries that we have. And so when we think about, what other elements that we ought to be designing for, there's so many factors in what for example, our clients or other methods in their industries, how AI is changing their world and how we actually have to be designing for it. For example, I was working recently on a television broadcasting studio. TV broadcast is completely different now with the world of AI, and we actually have to design spaces differently to accommodate that. And so when we think of what it is that we are able to offer, not only is it that we're designing the spaces, but it's even this operations, the functional components of what people are doing in those spaces that we also have to be aware of. I mean, if you think some time ago, we were just designing the walls, but now we have smart environments, but then we have AI trained environments, but then we think of the fact that all of our spaces need to be flexible and adaptable. We might, in the future, not only be designing a building, but we may be there for the life cycle of the entirety of the building and all of the flexibility that comes with it. So there are those other kind of elements that are spin-offs of these kind of, I like to call them expanded services, of like not additional, but expanded, ever expanding, depending on what the future may bring, and setting ourselves up to be able to allow ourselves to do that as an actual product.
Can I just jump in? Because one of the things that you're mentioning is the need to really evaluate many, many more things than we have in the past. If the industries are changing, if everything around us is changing, the people we're talking to around us are changing, other classes are changing, universities are changing. How do we know what is, how do we kind of land on what the right answer is when there are so many options being provided to us by AI and the other things? Like how do we kind of provide our students and ourselves primarily with the skills to evaluate that?
Well, if I may try to answer that, I think that architecture is a very research-oriented profession. So you always have to stay on top and up to date with whatever is happening, whatever is coming out, either in construction or the social issues or the underlying technologies that the spaces may need to accommodate. So I feel like the answer is just seeing architecture as a self-exploration journey in all. Like if you're an architect, you never stop learning because then the world never stops evolving. And we are here to serve that ever-evolving, ever-expanding, ever-changing world and to actually build the infrastructure for that. So I think that would be.
So not that I mean to hog this. Please jump in, anybody, if you want. But I was just saying, sometimes in my head, my professors are in the back there kind of going like, John, this is what, Michael Sorkin would say. This is what, another professor, Stephen Hall would say. And these, or Bernard Schumi or somebody, and these are kind of like, these are guideposts for me because each one kind of helped me to think about choices and how to make choices and how to think critically about things. And I'm wondering, with students just kind of pushing a button and kind of getting a response, how do we encourage them to think critically about what response they're getting? Maybe Daniel.
Yeah, I can add here. So we had 2023. We had a thesis project in our school where the students were trying to address, this kind of challenge that we have right now with text-to-image models like Midjourney, for example. Yeah, with Midjourney, you just type in text and you get a very high-quality image. Is that design? Is that actually representing your design sensibilities? Is that representing your formal language? And obviously it doesn't. So the question was like, how exactly then can we still use this technology, but perhaps find a way to develop our own language, our own syntax in a way? Yeah. So in that studio, what we did is we started to then be a bit more critical about the kind of outcomes that we were getting from these kind of models. And we use, in a way, this kind of AI models like Midjourney as a way of creating a catalog formal language or like different kind of elements. And then we engage in different kind of AI processes to figure out like how we synthesize now the language and how we create an AI model that represents now correctly our own formal language. Yeah. So through that process, the students, they had to go through a lot of kind of steps that we as humans, we just do right now intuitively. And very often, like, it's very hard even to explain like why we do them like that. We call that talent, or how we call it. But in this case, like, they really had to break down in a way all these kind of facets of design in a way, and try to understand and explain that those kind of aspects of design to a machine, like the machine is a baby, and explain those, and then compose a completely new style in a way. Yeah? So now, once they had their own kind of formal language, now they were able to generate things. Yeah. But for us, it's always this kind of question of, or I always present to students 3 phases in a project. One is explore, qualify, and generate. And the explore phase is mostly the phase where you just engage with the tools, just to kind of critically understand like what the tools are capable of, perhaps potential opportunities in design. And then a qualify phase is mostly about like which are now the tools that we have at our disposal to actually be able to evaluate the outcomes. And if we don't have the tools, like which are the appropriate tools that we have to develop to be able to evaluate outcomes. And only once we have these 2 components, like a way of exploring, a way of evaluating, that's when we start to look into, okay, how do we now generate, in a way, design, or however we want to call it. Yeah. So I think that's a sort of like process that for sure, in a way, like students, they have to go through that process to be able to actually get to some good results. I think also like it's hard in a way to understand perhaps how the student is going to develop a sort of design sensibility, because that's also a major factor in how things are going to be evaluated. For example, you know, a very famous designer might get much better results from Midjourney than an average designer, and has nothing to do with Midjourney being more capable or not. It has to do with the ability of that better designer in a way to filter, to evaluate, to select in a way better results, and to steer in a way the model in a certain direction. Yeah. But I think that's also something, there is an opportunity there, like to develop a very good sensibility. Imagine like right now you have AI and it can generate high quality results. So you're going to be exposed to a lot of high quality, hopefully, you know, data, let's say. And that's going to shape, in a way, your sensibility faster than in a conventional way. Yeah? Right now, conventional way, the way we shape our sensibilities by going to the library, flipping through magazines, visiting a building, and assimilating, in a way, that kind of knowledge in that way. With AI, we have this abundance, in a way, that we can really like shape our sensibilities. Yeah.
Let's open up to questions from the audience. Eric, we haven't got a roving mic, so you're going to have to come and use one of the mics up here. And we need to, yeah, we need to talk to it, because otherwise the YouTube.
Come down to, if you have a question,
Yeah.
you can come down to the side.
Yeah.
Maybe I just wanted to reconnect with something that Daniel was saying. Because you speak of language and sensibility, which are things that are precious to our generation, that come from being exposed to a previous wave, let's say, of computational advancement, that spanning Columbia and other places like that. But I feel like it's a narrow path to operate only on the basis of language or kind of expression or things like that, which obviously we do that. But I was recently exposed to, for instance, how other students, which is very intriguing to me, other students outside of architecture, but in the realm of design, how they are learning nowadays. In particular, somebody from REEKOLECT, and that they're sort of combining sort of processes of design based in different pieces of AI that are just being widely combined just for the purpose of designing systems to help create new outputs, rather than going to the sensibility to have something that is even separate. I like the idea of that separation or the distance. It's more a question. Jenna, I know we've been working with Wolf, obviously, and how does he choose what he likes? How did Peter Eisman choose the Maya drawings that we showed him at the office? I don't know, but he didn't like choosing. But I think that distance is important because the same way that when we draw by hand and we generate a number of sketches, they are never going to be the drawing, the project, right? There's a mind weird process of distancing yourself from the first, seeds of a project. I think that critical distance that happens is a process that is internalized in designers or in thinkers. Is important. Maybe there's an opportunity with all the amazing tools that you guys deal with to more think of the training to create systems that can produce design rather than training about the sensibilities or the stylization or the choices.
Yeah, for sure. Like the project that I was talking about, like it's a narrow kind of exploration, and for sure it's not trying to address the entire complexity of design. But I do agree in a way that, and probably this is one of the reasons most of you that already are familiar with some of the work that I've been producing from the very beginning. I was never a proponent of one AI model to solve all one AI model to rule them all. I was never of this kind of view. And the reason why I'm not of this kind of view is because my understanding of design is much complex than one AI model can, in a way, understand. That's one aspect. But then also like the aspect of, like you're saying, if you just have an AI model, pretty much that model is constrained to whatever data was trained on. So whatever you're going to get as an outcome is going to be just that, yeah? You're never going to find this kind of like weird kind of moments that could trigger perhaps a new kind of exploration, yeah? And that's why I'm more of a advocate for multiple AI models. Some of them, you might need them to be super specialized, super precise, like high quality renders, but others, they should allow you to explore things in a very, very vague way, like very abstract, like different kind of levels of abstraction, because in design, that's how we operate. Sometimes I draw something maybe in higher detail, and I really work at the detail of material and how cladding works and so on. But at a different phase, I might work in a very, very abstract, like just certain grids that start to overlap. And it's a matter of how I interpret those grids and then, how I push things forward from there, yeah? And this is something that also with Prix, with Coupillon Blau, it's always this kind of discussion about Prix. He has this kind of explanation where he was saying that, back in the days, the way that they were drawing, they were trying to draw in a way with their eyes closed. And the reason why they were closing their eyes while drawing, they were trying to avoid, in a way, being obedient in advance. And what they meant by that is, if I start to draw something and I'm fully aware of what I'm drawing, I'm already going to constrain myself because, for example, I'm drawing something and I draw a cantilever. So in my mind, it's going to be like, wow, the cantilever cannot be that long because we only have metal trusses or concrete, and we cannot, in a way, make such a huge cantilever. So therefore, before you before you were even creative, you started to constrain yourself, yeah? So you were obedient in advance, yeah? So in Coupillon Blau, then, they're always developing this kind of processes where we need this kind of like wild kind of exploration where reality is disregarded. But then that sketch, how do we bring it back now into more rigorous processes? And then from there, maybe something more speculative. And the entire process is what the project is in the end, yeah? So you end up with the final kind of outcome. But it's never like that initial, like, in Midjourney, you just type in text and get an image. That's not the project, yeah? I don't know if that's answering the question now.
Minsky talk about the hierarchy of agency. And this comes to the question of the synthesis. How do you complete all these different AIs that deal with technical aspects and, as you say, more abstract things? Which is the AI that helped me make a synthesis, which is often an emotional one? The problem is so much of architecture is that there are multiple clients that you have to address. And architecture ultimately is pretty clumsy at meeting the needs of all these agents out there. So how do you synthesize in the end? That becomes a very difficult problem because you might have this fantastic kind of exploration of a particular project, but you don't know how to end it. How is that done? Well, is that where emotion is allowed to come around? Say, this is my gut feeling. This is how we draw it together. Because your process, for example, that you are talking about, does that have a synthetic phase at the end?
No, it's emotion.
Yeah.
It's certainly emotion that drives from below service what we want to do.
Yeah, it seems to me that we have to be more open to emotion and understand that we are eventually emotional creatures. And that is our power.
Eric, what you were saying before about it resonated with what I was saying earlier, but I think there's going to be a shift from focusing on end products to more so designing processes. And I think for me, it's an analog version of that would be like an interdisciplinary collaboration. So, some years ago, I did a collaboration with two professors or researchers at the ETH in Zurich. And the first thing we did was we designed the collaboration and understood what each of our roles were. So my role was, the goal was to basically create ultra-thin formwork for concrete casting that would allow for bespoke variations. And, so my role as an expert in foldable structures was to design a really strong formwork with geometry. So I was the geometry of the formwork guy. Another person was a leading expert in the chemistry of concrete, so they were dealing with the chemistry of the material. Another person had an expert in digital concrete casting with robotic fabrication, so they were the ones responsible for designing the set-on-demand casting methodology. So geometry, material, methodology of fabrication. So each of us had our role. That was the first conversation. After that, we knew how to interface, and in the end, the result was something that none of us could have done without each other. I think AI, and this is also in line with Daniel's vision of the future of AI, is really going to be like that, but at a very different level with lots of collaborations. And I think it can be used not just for something aesthetic, but really tackling wicked problems. Like, how do we reduce the carbon footprint of how we build when 40% of the carbon dioxide emissions are associated with the built environment? How do we deal with basically cities that are prone to flooding? That's dealing with infrastructure. That's dealing with the ecology of landscape. It's dealing with building codes and policies. It's dealing with architecture. It's dealing with a lot of things. I believe with AI, we'll be able to kind of think about these polyvalent dimensions simultaneously and help us find new opportunities. So again, I think the analog is an interdisciplinary collaboration.
But Joseph, these three experts that you talk about, you were one of them. How did you finally come to a conclusion? You're very good at describing what each of them did, but you don't describe how it came together.
Can you repeat the question when you answer it?
Yeah, so Lars's question to me is, how did we basically synthesize the final design? And I mean, in the end, it really was each of us having our own role. So I had to synthesize the formwork geometry, but that wasn't necessarily in response to the way the chemist was designing that material. And that wasn't necessarily in response to the way in which the person
There was a hierarchy.
I don't think there's a hierarchy. There was more about three parallel trajectories that were working towards the same goal. But it's really, again, it's like polyvalent layers associated with the built environment. I mean, like the structural system may or may not necessarily perfectly interface with the HVAC system or with the programmatic organization of the building. They may or they may not. It depends. So architecture is complex, and a lot of these challenges we're dealing with are also multi-layered. But if you don't have all of them, then it's not as feasible.
Exactly.
Let's move on to the next question.
I bring this up generally, and it's just related to all the things. I feel like a lot of what we have talked about so far has related, formally, most importantly, I would say again, is that idea of AI as a collaborative model. It's something that we work with. It's something that's integrated into the design process and in of itself is focused on that optimization, that constant remodeling and turning over in sense. In my own experience in design, and what I came, I guess, to ask your opinions on is, at the end of the day, what I've found to be the most, we talked about AI being temporary in like the way that it operates, and that some things may come and go. I feel like one of the things that it's very good at doing as a permanent state, which lasts for me from the beginning of the design process till the end, that I've rooted deeply in when I use these tools, is the experience of the space. Is that although these spaces, I mean, we see up above us now, fluctuating in the way that they are, there's a feeling, there's an emotion, there's a light and a sound element. There's no sound on this video, but it's like you get a sensation for that. And that's what I find when I design with these tools, is that they're very good at capturing emotion with no definitive form, no definitive like spatial concrete location, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And I think that that's where its real asset is, at least from my perspective, thinking about it in the sense that I use it to design. The other half of it, I think, is the optimization of just how do you, and it was brought up, like, how do you bring multiple elements of a space, multiple disciplines to create or to use the space simultaneously and to make that work well. I think that that's I guess, more of the technical side of AI, but to me, I'm interested to hear, and I think this was touched on a little bit, is just integrating that emotional sense and documenting the emotional experience of a building and a project, really.
I mean, what I would say is that AI is. Oh, okay. No, but the AI is very capable of simulating emotion. There are a number of people at MIT Media Lab are doing that right now. And I would simply say that the movie Her was set in 2025. So don't think these entities cannot track certain visions.
I think a lot of architects and a lot of art critics have been infatuated with the spatial qualities and where do they come from? What does it mean? Those like more qualitative rather than quantitative measures where we say that architecture is successful or not. For example, even Zumthor has a whole book about talking about the difference in like the temperature in the different or the texture or whatever else. And Dewey says that an artwork or like strikes you as an experience first, and then you get to rationalize or kind of like dissect what it is that strikes you, as you say with this, that you don't know where it comes from, exactly that visceral response to what it is. And in some senses, AI has been able to simulate or emulate or kind of like be able to mimic that. And I think there are a lot of different theories behind what those qualities can be, spatial or not, but maybe it's up to a good designer or a good critic and curator to be able to tell where AI intersects with our own sensitivities and sensibilities. What was the second part of the question? Because
I was just going to add to that, just that this goes to what REEKOLECT is doing too, in terms of touching on that relationship between the emotional kind of aspects of this. It's a very kind of interesting realm that you're saying is opening up for you as a student of architecture. And we also see it opening up in the startup in terms of understanding human stories and how storytelling impacts us, and how, preserving the stories of and voices of our relatives.
And also on measuring the impact in the sentiment of like spatial qualities a posteriori after construction or a project is finished can be pretty accurately done right now with like facial recognitions and sentiment analysis that we can actually get from different AI models. And that is something that is already happening either with facial, as I said, facial recognition or even just conversational AI. So I think that is tapping into a future where we can tweak or optimize our experience within space and like be more of experiential designers, like curators of an experience rather than a construction kind of like oriented profession.
I think also like we can also look at AI because I agree that, it might be that this new technology suddenly opens up this dimension that before it wasn't necessarily that we ignore it in architecture. It's just that, okay, it's very hard to express it perhaps, yeah. And right now, like suddenly it opens up in a way, AI like so easily opens out this dimension for us, and suddenly we can take in consideration. So I think like that could be an interesting thing to observe. Like if you look through the history of different kind of tools, the impact that they had in architecture, we started with like, let's say, drafting, and the kind of architecture that we generated just through drafting, it's one type, yeah, because that technology enable us, in a way, certain access, a certain dimension of architecture, yeah. But then you start to have computation, and suddenly you start to have access now to building information, like, simulating like different environmental aspects, integrating those now into design, taking consideration those aspects. So that's, I think, an interesting question, perhaps, what other dimensions, in a way, AI opens up for us, yeah, that before we were not able to even touch them. They were not tangible, yeah. But now we can actually, have access to them, and also like empower somehow those dimensions to shape perhaps even more our architecture, yeah.
So I'm actually anxious at some point to ask, we have two members of the computer science department, and I'd love to ask them the comments room, but we have a question here. First of all, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'd love to hear what a computer scientist makes of architectures. Anyway, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I think my question is relatively simple, and it's really to do with open source versus closed source models of artificial intelligence, and if you see any benefit with one over the other. I know OpenAI, like last month or something, they released the AI agents campaign where you essentially get a $25,000 PhD level AI agent, and if you have any thoughts on that, and like if you see potential with or conflict with certain entities having the best models.
Well, from my perspective, I think there's a very big conflict in like not knowing the data that something is really trained on, but even being reliant as a profession or like in general as a society in these different models that are proprietary like pieces of software. So I think we are now entering an era of like a new space race, really, because the models that come from China, for example, are open source, and like you can see the data, and there is some documentation on what is going on, and also can be run locally, which is not the case for everything that comes from the US. But then there is like running that in the US also has a lot of implications that have to do with like surveillance, or like whether you want your data in a different country across the world, etc. But in my view, I think we will enter an era shortly, or maybe in the next decade, where these things will have to be institutionalized, or like have some sort of legislation around them, and some sort of like code of ethics. Right now, the advancements, the technological advancements are running a lot faster than legislation can even start to like grasp the effects, or whatever needs to be provisioned for, or like taken care of for the future. But I think we will have to deal with the ramifications of like having proprietary pieces of software very, very soon as a whole, because also like the CEOs and like the changes in power, like Altman kind of like stepping down, and then having all these changes and fluctuations causes a lot of turmoil that is still like on a technical level. There's no transparency. It's a black box of an operation on what is going on, really. So
just to chime in here, related to a little bit of what the architecture industry is doing as well for these proprietary softwares. I mean, I'm privileged to see a little bit under the hood, obviously, at Gensler, which is the largest and most profitable architecture company in the world. And, we're already starting to develop our own proprietary tools built off of our own architectural models as backgrounds and so on, and using those systems in place. So you can imagine that there are other architecture firms as well doing something similarly. And then there's a kind of two sides of that a larger firm with a sort of certain level of security of clients has to work within a different set of confines or a level of security than maybe a smaller firm may be able to be more nimble in certain ways that they're exploring it. But ultimately, I mean, there is kind of, I think, two ways that we may be seeing this proprietary aspect of AI tools developing. One is the sort of workflow processes that we're creating. And so if you have your own set of concoctions, whether it's a series of your own AI tools or an AI tool that can combine that kind of one piece that's proprietary, is combining all of the different inputs, that can be bespoke to perhaps your specific company. But also I could envision going back to your question a little bit more on this idea of emotion, because if you think about all of these tools that we're interacting with, especially let's just say even in conversational AI with ChatGPT and so on, you are training within that conversation a very specific way that it's interacting with you. I mean, I know personally for myself, I have certain chats where I'm like, this chat, if it's ever deleted, oh my gosh, like it is mine. It is my voice. It has hours and hours of my voice notes added into it. I've given it a lot of input, and in a way it has extracted my intuitive understanding and my preferences for that. So there is a certain value in that may be able to follow me as an individual. And similarly, if Midjourney or other visualization tools may have that, then it could be tracking essentially my aesthetic preferences, my way of tapping into that emotion. But then that begs the question of who owns me, like who owns that piece of me? And that's the larger piece of it all.
Well, the first comment about training your own AI software opens up a little bit the discussion into the scale of operations in the architectural world and how that can vary, because in a firm as big as Gensler, for example, that is pretty much like within the scope, but there are a lot of like smaller practices or like a lot of people that are working independently, and that is not always the case. So like democratizing in a sense the access to like open source or things that you can fine tune with your own material for very specific purposes or design tasks. I feel that is more of a down-to-earth approach to accommodate for all the different scales of operation.
Just one more aspect that relates to it that's a little different than the open or closed source portion, but yeah, not that long ago, I was in dialogue with a company that's one of the largest construction companies in South Florida. And I was surprised to hear that they've already developed within their own company over 40 different neural networks. But what's more surprising was that I found out that they're collecting data on everything. And they say they don't even know what the data is going to be good for, but they just know they got to collect data on everything. And they figure at some point it'll be useful for something. So also, it's not just about training these networks, but also about having the right data for them. So I think that's another aspect of it.
I'll just add also something here. So yeah, also in Coupillon Blau, like the Diffusion project is mostly about this. Yeah, like from the very beginning, like we were trying to address how do we develop our own proprietary kind of tools. And this was mostly just because, you know, we have a lot of proprietary data, let's say, in the sense of, for example, we have a couple of bank projects or some more important projects that you cannot really just share publicly. And I wouldn't trust, you know, necessarily like, you know, Midjourney and OpenAI for me to share that kind of information with a chat, yeah. So for sure, we had to develop then our own tools. And right now, then you have like this option of, you know, do you have the ability to train from scratch a model or not? Yeah, and to train a model from scratch probably is challenging for most of the architecture practices. But you can have the option of, you know, open source models. And I'm not sure, are you architect or computer science? Okay. Because like for me, like, you know, engaging or being a developer in a way of this kind of tools, you start to have a peek in a way into computer science kind of discipline. And for them, this kind of idea of open source is actually something super embraced. Yeah, in architecture, I'm not sure why it's not that embraced. Yeah, but it's something normal in a way to really have this kind of open source kind of models that everyone can then fine tune. Yeah. Now, do we need like proprietary tools like OpenAI kind of companies and so on? And I'll say yes, because reality is not so black and white. Yeah, reality is more nuanced. So in certain aspects, like I wouldn't trust necessarily my own like fine-tuning abilities to to dictate off is like the budget and stuff like that, because probably I don't have enough data to actually fine tune the model correctly for that. So then I need probably a more rigorous kind of model, like a proprietary model, like an OpenAI, something that's going to give me that kind of assurance, yeah. So I think it's always like, these kind of trade-offs that you have to look at. For sure, in the future, we are going to end up, every single one of you, you're probably going to have like 20, 30, 40 AI models that you train yourself on your own device, not by you being an expert, but simply by saying, okay, on my phone, I'm selecting 10, 20 samples images, and the model trains, and I have my own AI model. That's how simple it's going to get. And why I'm saying this is because 2018, when did we start, Neil, like talking more about AI? 2018, roughly, 17, 18, something like that. So in 2018, you have to understand that to generate just an image, 1024, 2024 pixels, and to have it high resolution, you needed like probably a 80 gigs graphic card. Right now, probably with a 6 gigs graphic card, you can generate higher quality than what we did 2018. And I think the trend, it's that direction now. Things are going to get easier in a way to compute. You're going to have on your device, on your smart watch, you're going to have a model like a GPT model on that small device. Yeah, that's where we are heading. And that's also like, if you look at open source, you can start to see in a way a lot of very, very capable models. They have 1 billion parameters. That means you can run it on a device, and you have like super high intelligence on a tiny device now, So that's why I'm saying, like you're going to get to that point where fine-tuning your own model is going to be so easy. It's really like, I just select a bunch of images or something, and you have the model. And that's where we are heading.
So maybe just to wrap things up, I'd love to get a view from the computer science department. My concern about most architects, if you ask them what AI is, they say mid-journey. And, nobody ever looks beyond that. I mean, to my mind, AI is about informational systems. It's about data. It's about large language models. It's about deep learning. It's about neural networks and all that. I find what was really fascinating is going online, listening to podcasts by Jeffrey Hinton, Demis Hassabis, and Sam Altman, all those characters. I think it's a fascinating other world. And I think that we need to really go beyond the image-based generation thing to really look at the systems that are changing. And I don't think that the cities of the future are going to look much different. They're going to operate in a completely different way based on informational systems that will be controlling the traffic, ... Anyway, but I would love to hear from the computer science department.
Okay, I'll start and then
Yeah,
the dean
okay.
can talk later. So my name is John Hall. I'm from Los Alamos National Laboratory for my computer science days.
Is it on?
Mic is on?
I don't know. How do you?
It's green, should be a green.
Yeah, it's got green.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, I'll get closer.
There you go.
Okay. So I was thinking about this from the education point perspective, okay? And so the first thing I would do is I figure out whether the student is going to be building tools or using tools. And that's going to be two completely different tracks, and not everybody's going to be capable of extending the tools that exist out there and coming up with new ideas, but they can still perform a very useful function by taking the tools that are out there, okay? The second thing, I think everybody who's dealing with AI right now for the next 10, 20 years is probably going to be figuring out when the AI is broken, when it's hallucinating, when it's giving bad answers. And so one of the lessons as a professor that you can give is, in architecture, I would think especially, is what's the penalty when things go wrong and you don't catch it? People die, and so, I saw in one of the earlier talks, I saw a building that was generated by AI, and it had airfoils off the sides. And I was thinking, if you're in a hurricane situation like in Miami or something like that, are those airfoils going to cause unexpected stress that would cause lift, on them and everything? And if you didn't put that into your model, it would never get tested against and everything. So that would be very, very bad. So getting the correct set of models is a big deal too. And and finally, in all businesses, when it comes to the business side of it, teaching the students that indemnification is the big thing, okay? I was having lunch with a guy, and now it's kind of famous because he's building rockets and stuff like that. And he said, what's the difference between an amateur rocketeer and a professional rocketeer? And he said, and I said, I don't know. He says, well, amateurs talk about thrust and payload and stuff like that. He says, professionals talk about insurance. Okay. And but finally, as professors, I think the best thing you can do if they're going to start getting into a world where you can't really check on everything, then you need to give rules of thumb. Okay. And you were talking about how different links might be dangerous. You know, you can't go beyond a certain point. That's a good rule of thumb, and people should know that. And if the AI generates something beyond that point, you really need to spend some time thinking about that. So those are kind of the issues that I came up with. So.
Can I add here something and we can converse? You're saying that you're computer science, yeah?
Yeah.
Mostly, yeah. So, because for us in architecture, like, right now we are talking about generative models, yeah? So generative model for sure is going to hallucinate, yeah?
You're saying generative models?
Yeah, generative models, yeah. They are going to hallucinate.
You have to be the generator, one inside of the generative model.
Yeah, so because like, when we talk about architecture, do we have certain tasks in a way where you can use these kind of models? Yes, yeah, because probably you don't deal with safety issues and so on, yeah. But then when you have to address structure or other kind of systems in architecture, probably you cannot just rely on a generative model because that generative model has a tendency to hallucinate, yeah. So you need maybe more predictive type of models, yeah. So for me, that's why, I'm mostly looking at it from this lens of you need to have multiple, because the problem that you're trying to address is not one, you cannot give just one solution to fit them all in a way. Yeah? You always have to look at, okay, aesthetically, yes, I have freedom to hallucinate and play with it, yeah? But structurally, safety-wise, I don't have that freedom, because if I take that freedom, insurance, people die, that kind of issue, yeah? So suddenly, I have to then look at the design problem as, okay, where do I have to use what type of model? And then also like students, they have to understand, that kind of critical aspect, like, even if they end up being just end users of these kind of tools, they have to understand, okay, this tool is very great, mostly for this type of task. This model is very good for this type of task. So now how do I bring this together and have the system help me design,
We should try and wrap things up. I'd love to get more of a discourse going on between the computer science department and architecture. I mean, I've always been fascinated by computer scientists. They think in an incredible different way. I just want to finish with a note thank you for all our panelists. It was a fantastic discussion. Thank you for Digital Futures for relaying this. But above all, thanks to REEKOLECT for sponsoring this. If there is a forward-thinking person right in this room right now, it's Daniel Sanchez. He is making history. We spoke about this before. He is thinking in the future perfect, not the future perfect, or what will be in place in 5 to 10 years' time, maybe even less, where we will be interacting with our grandmothers, talking to avatars of our grandmothers. And it's that interaction, which I think is absolutely astonishing, how we interact with AI, how it becomes a prosthesis or an alter ego or God knows what else. The world will change because of these devices. And I think we are seeing history in the making right now. So I would just sort of thank you so much for sponsoring this. And thank you, colleagues of computer science, for coming on the team. Thank you. Thank you. Did you have a question?